Today, we're going on a bit of a hunt, but not for anything you'd find in the woods. We're hunting for something much more elusive and, honestly, potentially way more dangerous. Those tiny, hidden bugs in the software that we all rely on every single day. And it all comes down to this one question that, probably keeps a lot of security experts up at night. With all the incredible technology we have, with all our advanced tools, how is it possible that critical, high-severity bugs still manage to slip right through the cracks? I mean, just look at this case from 2022. A really nasty bug was found in OpenSSL, and that's the library that secures a huge chunk of the internet. The wild part is, it was a pretty simple bug, the exact kind of thing that our best automated testing technique, called fuzzing, should have caught, instantly, but it didn't. That's a huge miss, and it really points to a fundamental flaw in how we're testing our software. Okay, so to really get to the bottom of this, here's our game plan. First, we're going to look a little closer at that big security mess. Then, we'll unpack the core issue, what's known as the fuzz driver problem. After that, we'll dive into a brilliant new solution, fuzzing inside a live program, and we'll see exactly how it works. Then, of course, we'll check out the test results to see if it's all it's cracked up to be. And finally, we'll talk about what this all means for the future of our security. All right, so first up, let's tackle this core obstacle head-on, the fuzz driver problem, and get into why our traditional testing methods just aren't cutting it anymore. So, before we go any further, what exactly is fuzzing? Well, you can think of it like this quality control robot for software. But instead of checking if something is built correctly, its entire job is to try and break it on purpose. It just throws mountains of random, unexpected, garbage data at a program to see what makes it crash. And in doing so, it reveals these hidden bugs. Now, to get this fuzzer to work on a specific piece of software, developers have to write this little piece of what they call glue code. It's known as a fuzz driver, and it's basically the bridge that connects the fuzzer's chaos to the specific code that's being tested. And right there, that's where the problem is. These fuzz drivers, they're a massive bottleneck. See, they have to be written by hand for every single library you want to test. They also tend to create these really simplistic test scenarios that don't capture the complex, messy ways that programs actually talk to each other in the real world. So all this manual effort becomes this huge barrier that stops us from fuzzing more software. So let's get to the really cool part, the innovation that tries to solve all this. This is a totally new way of thinking about the problem, fuzzing inside a live program. And this is where you can really see the difference. On the one hand, you have traditional fuzzing. Think of it like testing a car engine on a sterile lab bench. It's isolated, it requires those custom-built drivers, and it's all happening in this artificial environment. But the new approach, called in-vivo fuzzing, which literally means in the living, is like testing that same engine while it's actually in a car, speeding down the highway. It tests libraries inside a running program, it completely eliminates the need for fuzz drivers, and it finds bugs that only show up under realistic, real-world conditions. Okay, so how on earth does this actually work? Let's take a peek under the hood. All right, I know this diagram might look a little intense at first, but the process is actually pretty genius. See, on the far left, you start with the original program code. It goes through this process called instrumentation, which is kind of like adding tiny little sensors all over it. This creates a special version of the program with the fuzzer built right in. And that fuzzer then runs and starts hunting for any inputs that cause a crash, which you can see on the right. Okay, let's zoom in on how that works. First, the system identifies what are called amplifier points. These are just key functions inside a library that are interesting targets. Second, the code gets instrumented, adding those little hooks to watch for when these functions get called. Third, and this is the really slick part, the moment the main program calls one of those points, the system instantly makes a perfect copy of itself. It's a process called forking. The fuzzer then hijacks that copy and just starts messing with it. And finally, the fuzzer absolutely bombards that copied function with all sorts of new data, looking for anything that causes a crash. And the best part? The original program just keeps on trucking, completely unharmed. This all sounds amazing, right? But does it actually work in the real world? Well, let's look at the results. So check this out. This is a comparison for a library called AFLLIVE. The bar on the left shows a top-of-the-line tool that automatically generates those fuzz drivers. The bar on the right, that's the in-vivo approach, which is called AFLLIVE. And I mean, you can see for yourself it's not even close. AFLLIVE achieved way higher code coverage, meaning it explored a much, much bigger chunk of the library's code. But coverage is one thing. Finding actual bugs, that's the real test. And in that same experiment on AFLLIVE, AFLLIVE found 7. Count them, 7 previously unknown bugs. The other automated tools, they found a big fat 0. And this quote from the research brings us full circle, right back to that OpenSSL bug from the beginning. It turns out the function that had the bug was already being run by the project's own tests. It just wasn't being pushed hard enough. Which raises a really fascinating question. What if you could amplify the tests that are already there using this new technique? And folks, this is the mic drop moment. When the researchers used this technique to amplify OpenSSL's own test suite, the results were just stunning. Not only did it find that high-severity puny code bug that everyone else had missed, but it also found a completely new, previously unknown vulnerability, a bug so significant it earned a $2,400 bug bounty. And it did all of this with 0 false alarms. Incredible.
So what's the big picture here? What does all this mean for the future of software security?
Well, what it all boils down to is this. In-vivo fuzzing makes incredibly powerful, real-world testing dramatically more accessible for everyone. It lets us find these deep, subtle bugs that only appear in realistic situations, the ones we were missing before, and it does it without all that painful manual effort of writing and maintaining complex fuzz drivers.
This research really opens up a whole new frontier in bug hunting. It leaves us with a really powerful question to think about. What if we could find security flaws not just in some artificial lab, but inside the software that's running right now, in the wild, on our phones, our servers, and our computers? Well, that's the safer future this technology is pointing towards.